This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 43 of season 4 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, October 28, 1911, and I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford that week. The week starts with the Westford Center section. All roads led to the auction at Kittredge Farm, which was now 9 Depot Street, on Tuesday to settle the estate of the late owner, Mrs. Mary Brigham. The fine weather and the cutting out of the usual forenoon recess of the electric cars gathered a large crowd. At one time, 65 teams were counted hitched around the square field opposite the house. The sale was not finished on Tuesday, and the remainder was disposed of on Wednesday. Stock, tools, and household goods sold at good prices in most cases. Lunch was served on the premises during the day. It was estimated that fully 500 people were in attendance. Mrs. Adrith Carter returned from the Lowell General Hospital last week, Thursday, where she recently underwent an operation for appendicitis. Her many friends are glad that she is making a good convalescence. Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Blodgett and George E. Gould had a jolly husking party at their home on Friday evening of last week. Those present report plenty of fun, an abundance of red ears, and an appetizing supper served by the hostess. There were about 75 in attendance. The reference to red ears has to do with anyone who found an ear at one of these corn huskings that with red kernels could kiss the person of his or her choice. So that was always a popular find. Mrs. Jenny Fifield is visiting relatives in Nashua, New Hampshire, and Mrs. Ida Gould is taking her place in the William L. Woods household during her absence. The Boy Scouts had to defer their field day on account of the rain last Saturday to this Saturday afternoon at 2:30 at Whitney Park. Mrs. Fonzie Isles of Lowell has been in town this week, packing and removing her furniture, which she has stored in part of Oscar Spaulding's house, occupied by the Cutter family. This is preparatory for Mr. and Mrs. Blodgett and Mr. Gould's moving into Miss Moran's house, and for Joseph Wright and family getting into the house recently purchased by him from Mr. Gould. Mr. Wright and family have not been especially comfortable at the log cabin since cooler weather, and they, as well as their many friends, will be glad when they get established in their new house. I believe the log cabin referred to was on the top of Prospect Hill near the water tower in Westford Center. Frank Wright has been having the 15 days vacation from RFD Route Number 1 allowed by Uncle Sam, and Warren Carkins has been substituting for him. Mrs. Fletcher Peckins is ill at her home with bronchial pneumonia. The John Perkins family are in quarantine with measles, 2 of the 4 boys being sick. Next section is a funeral. The funeral of the late Augustus Bunce was held from the home at Providence Farm Thursday afternoon, October 19th at 2:30 o'clock. I believe that was located on Providence Road. Reverend David Wallace was the officiating clergyman. Mr. Wallace paid a very sympathetic and sincere tribute to the memory of the deceased, which found ready response in the hearts of all present. A quartet from the church consisting of Houghton Osgood, Arthur Day, Mrs. Cyril Blaney, Miss Althea Sims rendered the following selections: "Who are these like stars appearing?" and "For all thy saints who from their labors rest." The bearers were Houghton Osgood, Arthur Day, George Snow, and W.H.H. Burbeck. It's William Henry Harrison Burbeck. Interment was in the family lot in Fairview Cemetery and was in charge of Undertaker David Grieg of Westford. The next section is the Westford Grange section. At the regular meeting of the Grange last week, Thursday evening, a class of 7 candidates received the 3rd and 4th degrees. The 3rd degree was in charge of the ladies' degree staff, with Mrs. Fred A. Snow directing the work, which was done in a most commendable manner. The 4th degree was rendered by the regular officers. Refreshments were served in charge of the executive committee, William R. Taylor, Alonzo Sutherland, and Dr. Cyril Blaney. This Grange has accepted an invitation to Neighbors' Night at Carlisle Grange November 1st. Westford Grange is to furnish part of the entertainment. The next section is on the Tadmont Club. The second regular meeting this fall of the Tadmont Club took place on Library Hall on Tuesday afternoon. There was a good attendance of the members present. It was voted after careful consideration to extend the membership limit from 75 to 100. A committee on preliminary exercises had arranged for the reading of a poem by Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes, which was one of his keen satires on a type of doctors of the old school. This was excellently read by Miss Martha L. Grant. The speaker of the afternoon was Dr. Orion Wells of Westford, who gave a paper on, quote, epochs in medical history, end quote. This was followed, and deservedly so, with the closest attention. It was the studious medical man's presentation of an extensive subject brought to the comprehension of the average listener, a skillful outline of the accomplishments of men of science for the alleviation of human disease and suffering. Hippocrates and Galen of early time and later in the development of medical history, such names as Harvey, Jenner, Morton, Lister, Pasteur, and others, and what they had achieved. Dr. Wells outlined what anesthesia, antitoxin, X-rays, septic, and antiseptic surgery had accomplished in medical science. Other important subtopics were the progress in the treatment in such dreaded diseases as smallpox, diphtheria, tuberculosis, yellow fever, and acute cerebrospinal meningitis. Dr. Wells was very well liked in town. Unfortunately, died at a young age in October 1918 during the famed influenza epidemic of 1918. At the close of his paper, Dr. Wells showed some interesting plates illustrating the work of the X-rays. The next meeting will be the first in the winter special tour for study of South America, the special subject being the conquest of Peru, in charge of Charles Prescott. The next section is called Presentation. Following the regular service at the Congregational Church on Sunday evening, a somewhat unusual and interesting event took place. This was the farewell goodwill party with presentation tendered to Mrs. Sarah Lillian and May Arnold, who lived at 4 Graniteville Road, who were to leave the following Wednesday to spend the winter in California. A little diplomacy was used to ensure the presence of all 3 at the meeting. This was a little unusual in that these 3 unmarried sisters usually went to Florida together during the winter. Now they're going to California. Following the preaching service, Arthur Day, church moderator, called a brief business meeting when John Wright was chosen assistant treasurer in place of Miss Lillian Atwood, the regular church treasurer, during the latter's absence, after which Mr. Wallace requested the audience to remain seated a little longer and, in most felicitous manner, extended the goodwill and appreciation to the Mrs. Atwood of their many friends in the church, and presented, as a slight manifestation of the same, a gift to each to use while away and to remind them of the home friends. To Miss Lillian, a fountain pen of newest pattern, which he suggested might be used to record new impressions and to write to the home friends. To Miss Sarah, he presented an electric flashlight, and to Miss May, a beautiful traveling toilet set in sealed leather case. A 4th gift for the use of all the party was a fine, large thermal bottle. The Atwood sisters bought a car around this time frame, and there's a nice picture of them sitting in the car in front of their house at 4 Graniteville Road. I'm wondering if they took the car out to California on this trip. The recipients were taken completely by surprise, and no formal speeches were expected. Mr. Osgood immediately announced the hymn, "God Be With You Till We Meet Again," which was sung with very significant and a genuine expression, after which all repeated the Mizpah benediction with the same earnestness, and then came the opportunity for all to informally greet the prospective travelers and to wish them Godspeed and a pleasant sojourn in the West. The Mizpah benediction is given in Genesis 31:49. It reads, "The Lord watch between me and thee when we are absent one from another." Mizpah is a Hebrew word that means watchtower and is loosely interpreted as, "May God watch over you." Much regret is felt over losing the Mrs. Atwood for the winter, for they fill a valuable place in the church's activities, musically, socially, and as pastors' helpers, and a very hearty welcome awaits their return. The next 2 paragraphs are entitled Entertained. Mr. and Mrs. David Grieg and Mrs. Willard Fletcher combined forces on Tuesday evening and gave a very delightful party to a large gathering of their friends. This was held at Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher's pleasant home in the Westford Depot neighborhood, and the spacious rooms were well adapted to the present entertaining of the guests. A bountiful supper was served during the early evening. The decorations were in keeping with the season of Halloween, supplemented with autumn foliage. After full justice had been done in the delicious menu, progressive whist was enjoyed. Each guest also received a pretty Halloween souvenir. David Grieg read a selection on, quote, husbands, end quote, which was much enjoyed. A good old-fashioned song with Miss Gladys Fletcher at the piano filled out the evening's enjoyment, after which good nights were said with very sincere assurances to their entertainers by the guests of a most enjoyable evening. There were fully 40 guests present. Next, we have the About Town section. Hugo Page is seriously ill with pneumonia at his home on Depot Road. Dr. Blaney is in charge of the recovery problem, which makes it look encouraging for recovery. Brookside Station on the Stony Brook Railroad was operated on last week Friday night for financial reasons. 20 cents worth of financial irregularity was discovered. It took an auto and experts to perform this irregularity act, that is, burglary, as their Entertaining and Departure Act clearly proved. That should be Entering and Departure Act clearly proved. Foxes are marketing the poultry in the Stony Brook Valley. Prices are not satisfactory, and an attempt is being loaded up to lessen the returns. The foxes are liable to have the returns read to them at any time, probably with a shotgun. The next meeting of the WCTU, Women's Christian Temperance Union, will be held on Wednesday, November 1st, with Mrs. Samuel Taylor at the Old Oaken Bucket Farm, an appropriate name for the nature of the meeting. Mrs. Homer Seavey, who was a delegate to the state convention held at Holyoke, will make her report at this meeting. The next section is called Conference. The Conference of Unitarian Churches of Middlesex North met with the Old First Parish last week, Thursday. The weather was cloudy and threatening, but the thinking spiritual was bright and light and threatening more. The large audience clearly thought so, and the addresses of the day were heavily charged with the inspiration that is particularly of this new Opportunity Day of ours. Reverend Albert Lazenby and Reverend Abraham Rybaney both struck new springs, the former on, quote, the men and religion movement, and the latter on, quote, the new spirit and religion, end quote. The Old First Parish maintained its old-time record for hospitality towards the individual as thinker and guest at the noon hour, which enables to think on more and wiser. About 30 sat down to dinner. At the election of officers, Abiel J. Abbott of Westford was chosen president. Other officers were from out of town. Next, we come to the Forge Village section. On Saturday evening, October 28th, a supper and entertainment will be held in Recreation Hall. The supper is in charge of the members of the Ladies' Sewing Circle, who are busy preparing most palatable dishes. The children of the Sunday school will entertain the audience after supper. As the proceeds of the affair will be used for the benefit of St. Andrew's Mission, it is hoped that a large number will attend. Services at St. Andrew's Mission will be held on Sunday evening at 7:30 o'clock. Reverend Bumpus will occupy the pulpit. Mr. and Mrs. George Good here are to leave for New York, having closed their cottage on Forge Pond for the season. A large number from this village attended the husking bee at the home of George Gould in Westford last week, Friday evening. The Mrs. Teresa Lowther and Rachel Cherry have joined the Choral Society of Lowell. Mr. and Mrs. Willis Holt of Lowell was the guest of Mrs. Willis Holt of Lowell was the guest of Mrs. M.A. Lowther on Wednesday. Miss Violet Collins of Providence spent the weekend with her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Miles Collins. Mr. and Mrs. Fred Swain and family have purchased a new house in North Chelmsford, which they hope to occupy shortly. Mr. and Mrs. George Kugel are spending their vacation visiting relatives and friends in Hartford and Bridgeport. Albert Rose of Cambridge is the guest of his grandmother, Mrs. Mary Ward. Matthew Elliott, while at work in the mill on Monday, was taken suddenly ill with an attack of acute indigestion and was carried to his home on Bradford Street. You have to wonder what he ate. Next section is the Graniteville section. The apple crop in Westford has been unusually heavy this year, and several men from this village have been employed as pickers during the past week. The Young Ladies Club held a social dancing party in Healy's Hall on last Saturday evening, which, in spite of the rainy weather, was well attended. The Colonial Orchestra of Lowell furnished excellent music for dancing, and at intermission, refreshments were served. A daughter was born to Mr. and Mrs. Elisha Hanning. It's given as Hannon, Hannon, in the newspaper, but it should be Hanning, Hanning. She was born on Monday, October 23rd. Actually, according to the Westford Vital Records, she was born Sunday, October 22nd, and her name was Jessie J. Hanning. The next paragraph is also titled Entertained. The Knights of King Arthur entertained the Queens of Vanillon at luncheon given in the M.E. Church Vestry on last Saturday evening and was largely attended. The knights, who proved to be princes at entertaining, made it very pleasant for their lady friends. After luncheon, a short but select musical program was given that proved to be thoroughly enjoyable to all. The remainder of the evening was taken up with the playing of games and other forms of amusement, and the whole affair was voted a great affair. The pastor, Reverend Louis Havermale, was present during the evening and was greatly pleased with the entertainment provided and the good work of the Knights of King Arthur, a men's group at the Methodist Church in Graniteville. The next couple of paragraphs are called Serenaded. And this is a great description of an old-fashioned shivaree, if you've ever heard people refer to a shivaree, Shivaree. Mr. and Mrs. Charles McLenna, MC capital Lenna, who have recently returned from a brief honeymoon trip, were serenaded at their home on Broadway on Thursday evening of last week by a large number of their friends who came to extend the hand of welcome to the young bride and congratulate Charlie, on his choice. The party assembled at Music Hall and, headed by the Bingville Band, with Thomas Hughes as drum major, marched to the McLenna home. The instruments used by the band members as in quotes, were not injured in any way by the slight mist that was falling, as they have stood many a hard campaign, being the property of the Graniteville Cornet Band, the same tenors, baritones, and slide trombones having been in existence here about 25 years. And they were probably purchased by the Abbott Worsted Company. The players were not skilled musicians, but what they lacked in harmony, they made up in volume, and judging from their efforts in getting music out of the horns, one could see that their work was a labor of love. Charlie soon responded and set up the cigars for all, after which there was a spasm by the band. Frank Charlton then sang, "When a Girl from Old New Hampshire Loves a Man in Graniteville." This was followed by "The Hills of Old New Hampshire," both complimentary to the bride, who was formerly of Nashua, New Hampshire, a girl. After a brief reception was held by Mr. and Mrs. McLenna, during which all shook hands with the bride and bridegroom. 3 cheers were given to the happy couple, and after singing "For He's a Jolly Good Fellow" and "Good Night, Ladies," the serenaders, with their harmonious accompaniment, formed in line and marched back to the hall, where all separated for their various homes. It was a welcome home for Charlie and his bride, all right, and both appreciated the thoughtfulness of the boys. The boys is also in quotes. The next section is on St. Catherine's Church. Sunday morning, St. Catherine's Church, both Masses were celebrated by Reverend Michael Doherty, and he also delivered the first of a series of instructive sermons on, quote, the holy sacrifice of the Mass, end quote. On Tuesday afternoon at 3:30 o'clock, instruction for the children who are preparing for their first communion was held in St. Catherine's Church. In the evening at 7:30, the Holy Rosary devotions were held, followed by benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. The regular choir were in attendance, and the services that were conducted by Reverend M.E. Doherty were largely attended. Tomorrow evening at 7:30 o'clock, there will be a meeting of the Holy Name Society in St. Catherine's Church, and every man, particularly the young men of the parish, are invited to be present. And that's the news in Westford for the week ending October 28th, 1911. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Ryan Cousins of WestfordCAT for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions and podcasts from the Wardsman at our website at museum.westford.org or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from days gone by. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.